So Friedrich, thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. It's quite chilly, so I'll try to warm you up a little bit over the next half hour by basically just a series of stories and some thoughts and ideas where things are going. My observations in the US over the past couple of years and how I also see the ecosystem growing over here and what's currently happening. Just to give you a little bit some more information about my background. It's computer science and economics out of Berlin and Berkeley. Then I spent 5 years in the US in Los Angeles working for Accenture. Then I moved to Asia, worked out of Seoul, Tokyo and Beijing for another 5 years. Then came back to the US to Pittsburgh, where I founded a company together with one mathematician from Helsinki, who was a professor at Carnegie Mellon University at that time, and two old buddies of mine from Accenture. This company was in combinatorial optimization, which you use in sourcing, for example. So we sold licenses to companies like IKEA or Procter & Gamble or Johnson & Johnson, and then eventually the company 7 years later to Siemens. And then I started my own venturing operations and my own investment company. So just to tell you a story, just about 4 weeks ago, I was sitting at Factory with Konstantin Sixt, who is the junior member of the Sixt family that you all may know from renting cars here in Germany. And to an extent of 50%, they also own Drive Now, which is the shared car service provided by BMW and Sixt in a joint venture fashion. And so he was reporting very proudly about how this is all working out, and that he has now roughly 600,000 registered clients that are using Drive Now in Europe, and now to some extent even in the United States. And in parallel to that, we were talking about the go-to-market strategy of Apple with the iCar. And what Magna is doing in the background in terms of becoming the systems integrator to Apple. Similar to Apple is seeing Foxconn, they are seeing Magna as the integrator for the future iCar. So from my perspective, and 3M, as I said, has been doing quite something with Apple, I see that down there we're going to have little iCars with little apples on the hood in I don't know, 3 or 4 years maximum. And the question is, what will happen when you take a view from the ecosystem perspective, when Apple will have this offering available? So probably, and this is what I told Mr. Sixt, I said, well, in probably in 3 years or so, you may get a call from Cupertino telling you that Apple is now basically also in the same business of giving you a car for 34 cents per minute when you're using it. And at that point, Apple may decide to tell you, well, either Apple is getting a 30% revenue share based on the App Store's business model from all the revenues that Drive Now is generating, or the next day we have to kind of kick you out of the App Store because we are now running that business ourselves. And that's something that should tell us, especially the German economy, that people who govern and run those ecosystems like Google or Apple have a certain handle on what can be done here going forward. And that's something that many companies here, especially the Mittelstands companies, haven't really understood yet. And this is something that in my day-to-day business I'm trying to convey to those companies in order to make them understand that change is about to come, and the change is going to be much more massive, I think, than usually people would estimate here. If you look at, for example, Volkswagen, and when you look at the fact that they are currently making 10 million units per year based on roughly 680,000 people who are working for Volkswagen, and roughly 2.5 million people who are working for suppliers that are directly solely connected to Volkswagen, this company is totally system critical to Germany. And then you look at Toyota making the same number of units with roughly half the employees compared to Volkswagen. And then you start to ask yourself whether the supervisory board of Volkswagen is really doing their job right in terms of not asking what's going on there, right? So having those discussions and in parallel then seeing that Volkswagen is investing $300 million in Gett, based out of Tel Aviv in Israel, which is an equivalent to Uber or Lyft. And then telling you in the same moment that they have done this in terms of being able to exercise a certain amount of control over what Lyft is doing. This is the beginning to the end of German venture capital in non-German companies from my perspective, because if somebody like Volkswagen with a very limited knowledge around how those ecosystems work and how this business is done is then even trying to exercise control about a company like Gett, this may point into the wrong direction. And then 2 days later, Saudi Arabia is investing 2.5 billion in Uber. And this should tell us where things are pointing. From my perspective, I see this being a major threat to the German economy, in this case for a corporate, but in many, many other cases to mid-tier companies, the Mittelstands companies. And the economy in our country is largely based on Mittelstands companies. So if this is starting to get harmed, then our country may face issues going forward of a nature that most people here cannot really foresee today. But I think it's more or less around the corner in many, many areas. I'm a bit cold up here, so excuse me when my voice is, but the wind is really coming from the west, which is there. Okay, so this is just a little lead in into what I see coming. I'm pretty critical about the situation in terms of that I can kind of see what has happened in the United States and how industrial production has left the United States, and how the United States are now trying, based on modern technology and new ways to address manufacturing or automation, are now trying to bring back industrial production to the United States. And there's a very interesting story connected to that that's continued actually this morning. And I don't know who here in this audience knows about EOS, Electro-Optical Systems, a 3D printing company from Germany. They basically own all of the major patents to 3D metal printing for titanium, copper, or nickel, for example. And this company is located in Bavaria, outside of Munich. As I said, they basically own all the relevant patents around metal 3D printing. From my perspective, EOS will grow to become one of the most important, probably the 20 most important companies within the next 10 years, because manufacturing will largely shift from robotic automation to 3D printed automation and manufacturing processes. And this morning I was sitting down with the founder of Local Motors, those guys who print complete cars 3D, which is really amazing to see. So just enter Local Motors into YouTube, and you'll see how a complete car can be printed in just a couple of hours, including drivetrain and everything that you need that will be assembled into the car. And then EOS trying to explain to those guys how their technology can be best used to apply such an advanced manufacturing process to even making a car. And if you now then would address this to somebody like BMW or Volkswagen or Audi, they are so far away from this kind of thinking that this is again posing another threat on our economy in a very specific way in this case. But when you then take a detailed look at EOS itself and you're asking them, hey guys, so who are your major clients? And as I said, this is a German company owned by one single person, which is Mr. Langer, who founded EOS back in 1989. The biggest client is GE. And GE is 3D printing injection nozzles for aircraft engines out of one single piece of titanium. That takes about 3.5 or to 4 hours to print, and then you can take it out of the machine and put it into the aircraft engine immediately. While before you had a device that looked similar, that consisted of 300 individual components, 300, was very cumbersome to manufacture and put together, very error-prone, while today EOS is able to just print it in a single machine, in a single process, out of one single piece of titanium, which is, to me, totally amazing. And then you ask the guys again, so who are your second and third and fourth largest customers? Again, it's no German companies. So this technology that will enable things to really change rapidly over the next couple of years is largely being used by companies from North America, from Korea, from Japan, and now from China. But the German companies, like Siemens, for example, they don't really see and anticipate what's happening, which is really interesting to see because EOS's headquarters is just about 4 miles away from the headquarters of Siemens in Munich. This leads us to another point here in Germany that I find very, very interesting, especially after having spent so much time in the United States. If you look at what we have done over the past couple of years in terms of, let's say, consumer electronics, this business is no longer existing in our country. It's gone. It's now largely being run by companies in South Korea, in China, in Japan, and in North America. So what I'm always trying to explain is that several trains have already left the station. Like one of them is called consumer electronics. Other trains like insurance or banking or automotive or manufacturing are also about to leave the station. So if we are not putting us and our economy and our peers here into a position to really understand what's currently going on, we will face major issues in this country. Why? Because in the end, everything is global. And if I talk to a German Mittelstands company, I don't want to mention any names, but let's take some company from electronic appliances or other areas like home automation, for example. If they are trying to invent the next generation of their products, what they usually do is they probably go from Ulm, where they're located, to the RWTH in Aachen, or to the TU in Munich, or here to Berlin if they really have a lot of time. Or sometimes they may also go to the ETH in Zurich. But that's it. They're not willing to spend the time to go to the United States and go and see what's happening over there. And there you have this thinking that is now largely based on ecosystems and on really advanced demand response systems and other systems. And this thinking is not really anchored here yet. So one thing that we need to do is to really open up in order to go and figure out what the possibilities are and how to connect to them. Which is directly leading me to an example of MIT that I talked about earlier. So one of the first moves I did after I joined 3M was basically going over to MIT. And if you have a 3M business card at MIT, people go like, wow, yeah, we need to talk. Because the perception of 3M in terms of inventing things, in terms of defining processes to bring new products to market is unparalleled. So 3M has a huge perception in the United States, even much more than here. And so with my business card, I basically could talk to everybody, to the people who run the labs for mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, etc. I was lucky enough to be able to meet Professor Bose, who started this loudspeaker company, 45 years back or so. And he was teaching at MIT for 30 years. And in talking to him, I got to know a couple of other people. And one startup that is called Portal Instruments, and that's a really fascinating story. What they do is needleless drug injection. So basically high-pressure injection of drugs into the human body. And so initially when I saw that, this company was valued at not even $10 million. And this was exactly 4 years ago. And as 3M is also doing a lot in drug delivery, in terms of micro patches and other things, I thought, hey, this may be an interesting opportunity. Then I got to know Professor Ian Hunter, who at that time was running the lab for mechanical engineering. And he explained the system to me. And basically the system is a very simple device that is based on a moving coil. And the moving coil is moving the membrane here in the loudspeaker. So it's a very simple device with an electric coil connected to some membrane that is mounted in a frame. And what Hunter's team was doing is they used this method in order to take a certain amount of pharmaceutical substance. Let's take insulin for diabetes treatment as an example, to basically pull this out of a tank, put it under very high pressure, and then shoot it through a nozzle that was actually engineered at 3M, which is a polycarbonate nozzle that is treated with lasers, and then shape a liquid bullet to shoot it through your skin into your tissue. Which is all you need to do for insulin to treat diabetes. And then we thought, hey, this is a pretty cool idea. So we invested in this company as the first investors at a valuation of like roughly 10 million. And then we thought, hey, it also makes sense to bring in a pharmaceutical player in order to make sure that the viscosity of the medication that is being conveyed by the device is good enough in order to work with the whole system. So I started talking to Genzyme in Boston, which at that time was acquired by Sanofi out of Paris. The Sanofi people then invested at a valuation of roughly 25 million, like 9 months later. And then we were lucky enough to bring Peter Thiel in and Founders Fund at a valuation of like 120 to 140 million. And we continued to develop the system. We tested it out. And now, just very recently, actually 2 weeks ago, it got FDA approval to be used on humans. But before we did that, or before that happened, we actually talked to Google because 3M has a very close connection to Google in terms of making the prism for Google Glass, which is the picture providing device for glass. And so I was always in a position to be able to call Astro Teller, who at that time and still today is running Google X, which is like the future lab of Google, where all the specific ideas that especially Sergey Brin has are put into place by a rather small team of really sophisticated people. So in terms of talking to Astro, I told him, hey Astro, you guys introduced this contact lens that can sense the blood sugar level in the human eye based on the tear liquid in the human eye. And he said, yeah, this is something we thought about and also then put out to press. Then I was asking him, so is it working? Like how is it set up? Who's manufacturing it? And he said, yeah, we're not there yet. And then I said, hey, why don't we work on this at 3M? Because 3M is very capable when it comes to taking films, thin films, and printing electronics into those films or vapor depositing certain structures into those films. And so basically we made this contact lens for Google working. And now the system works in a way that you have the actual injection device velcroed with a tape to your upper arm. And this system is then issuing a low-power Bluetooth burst to the contact lens, which is basically waking up the microprocessor in the lens that is then measuring your blood sugar level. At the same time, the blood sugar level is conveyed back to the device, and the device is automatically conveying a certain amount of insulin into your body. So you have closed-loop diabetes, which will change the life of roughly 500 million people on Earth. And this is what I loved about this job. You can really kind of play on a very big level. And at that time, certainly Google Ventures invested as well. And now the company it's more or less still operating not in stealth mode, but people don't really know it yet. Now we're at a 9-digit valuation. Just very recently, Takeda invested, which is the largest pharmaceutical company out of Asia. Now we have a complete ecosystem that is also largely based on software, of course, because all the data that you can gather when you're treating people on a permanent basis with a constant interaction with a mobile device like your smartphone that you have in your pocket, and then connect the data to your doctor, to your hospital, and to your insurance company. This will change the world in a pretty short time frame. Basically our stake in this company increased value-wise by like roughly $800 million, which is an amount that is kind of like so huge that you barely can imagine how this could all happen. But when you see the business perspective around this, that this company even next year could already generate north of $2 billion in revenues by selling those devices via Sanofi and Takeda, and us selling the nozzles. And with the nozzles, we were smart enough to secure in the initial contract that after start of production and go to market, 3M can make those nozzles for 5 years under a specific contract that doesn't allow anybody else to enter the market. So we structured the contract in a way that it will, next to the increase in value of the company, also convey significant revenues to 3M because we have the technology that in the end conveys the medical substance into the human body. So that was a fun ride and also allowed us to build more perception among other venture capital firms, but certainly also among the large venture capitalists. So recently we were able to get into deals with Kleiner Perkins Founders Fund, Sequoia, and Andreessen Horowitz, where they are investing in areas like advanced display technologies, for example, where 3M is solving a certain trick in terms of technology, and then gets a certain exclusivity around the actual offering when it's coming to market. I don't know who has seen this whale jumping out of this gym in the Magic Leap video. It's a pretty cool video, and this is a combination of projection and a hologram, and this will take probably another 1.5 to 2 years to really go to market. But when it will like blow us all away. I've seen the prototypes, and the prototypes are already like really good and almost picture perfect. So they will allow us, based on the next generation of Google Glass that will be hidden in frames that you won't see it anymore, to project somebody who's actually in Japan, but we would all think that he or she is sitting here. And this would not work in a way like R2-D2 is displaying Princess Leia in some shabby format that barely anybody can recognize. It will work in a way that this will be like 4K HD or like Ultra HD resolution. Which was a fun thing to do, but because this was initially an idea again from Google to kind of make this work, and then suddenly this is all coming together. So that was also another component that we really like, that I love to do. Just one more story, if we have the time, and it's a scary story in a way, but very interesting. Just recently, I was visiting Bob Langer. He's heading up medical at MIT, and when you enter his office in Cambridge, you enter a room that is like 6 meters high, and one of the walls that doesn't have windows is full of like certificates and like papers issued by NASA, the Pope, Angela Merkel, or Barack Obama, honoring him for his achievements in sciences. And I know him quite well over the time at 3M. And so I was sitting down, and he always has something, like some gadget in his drawer that he's presenting to me. And then at that moment he said, well, Thomas, look at that. And he was throwing a Petri dish onto the table that was sealed in plastic and had a yellow biohazard symbol on it, like the radioactivity symbol, but it's looking even more scary. It's like really scary, I tell you. And he threw it onto the table, and he said, hey, Thomas, guess what this is? And I said, well, looks like something evil. And he said, yeah, well, it's Ebola, and we just printed it. Which sounds like mind-boggling if you think about it. But given today's technology in terms of genome printers and in terms of genome compilers, so basically, if anybody here knows GitHub and how GitHub works, those genome compilers are the exact similar thing in genome and phenome technology. Then he told me that the development speed, given possibilities like 3D like genome printing and those genome compilers, Moore's law is not Moore's law in this case, but it works 5 times as fast. So basically every other year things go tenfold. So the capabilities in 2 years will be at a factor of 10, then 100, and then 1,000, which will basically enable possibilities that a complete genome analysis, and our genome is represented by roughly 20 gigabytes of data. 20 gig, like you can put it on every memory stick that costs you €1 or something. And basically this data can be analyzed going forward by every single flush of a toilet at basically no cost. The same thing cost you back in 1996 when the Human Genome Project finished. It cost the human society and this company Genzyme roughly $6 billion to do that. Then roughly 10 years back it was about $1 million to have your genome completely sequenced. Today it costs you roughly $230 with a device that is about the size of a fridge, and going forward it will be at no cost anymore. Which then will have massive impact on how you are being insured for your health status, around how pharmaceutical companies operate, and how healthcare is being provided. And this is just around the corner. We will all experience that, and we will experience it to a level that will be so impactful that it will really change us around in a way that I'm sometimes really like totally excited about, but 5 minutes later sometimes concerned about, because it will really change metrics completely and the rules for how things are being played. And it will destroy companies in no time, but it will build new companies in no time as well, which is something that we really have to make ourselves aware of, that those cycle times will change radically, and that the amount of disruption that is happening will also change radically. And having 2 kids that I have, sometimes you go like, wow, there's so much opportunity on one side, but on the other side, there's also so much change and associated risk. But then when I see people like Sebastian, who actually founded Udacity, I don't know who knows Udacity, and basically he said, well, Thomas, I don't want to teach in front of 200 students anymore when I talk about machine learning and AI at Stanford. I want to teach many more people in order to help the planet to grow and convey my ideas. And then he left Stanford after he actually started Google X before Astroteller and also initiated the self-driving car project at Google. He now decided to leave Stanford and is now teaching people in Africa that are connected to his lectures via the internet. And he says now on average 200,000 people are watching his lectures. 200,000, which is really driving a change that I think is needed. And is now also even addressing in a very democratic way people that are sitting in Africa or somewhere in Southeast Asia that usually don't have access to such high-level education. So there are also many good signs that are being enabled by what's happening, but also many other things where you go like, where's this all going to end up going forward? And this is making my life sometimes really like shifting me to like in between a lot of hope and a lot of fear when you get all those insights into those new ideas. And one story to finish off, then I'm done. That was actually a very interesting discussion again with Astro Teller of Google X. And by the way, he's the grandson of Edward Teller, who invented the hydrogen bomb. So that's kind of his nature. He's like really like at it. And you may recall that Google has those platforms in the harbor of San Francisco, close to Berkeley, where there are apparently like huge numbers of IBM processor blades in some boxes that are sitting on those platforms. And everybody was always wondering, what is this intended for? Yeah, and in the discussion I had with Astro, he said, well, or I was asking, is this somehow related to Calico? And I think here in Europe barely anybody knows Calico, but Calico stands for California Life Company, and it's a company that got started like 3 years ago by Art Levinson, who used to be the guy at Genentech who was in charge of sequencing the human genome back in the 1990s. He then turned chairman of Roche in Switzerland, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies on the planet. And next to that, he also became chairman of Apple. And he's now heading up this effort of Calico. And Calico is largely being financed by the 2 founders of Google, Brin and Page. And Brin's idea is to basically like ramp up human life to 120 to 140 years under very good health by understanding the mathematical correlation in between the human genome and the human phenome. The genome we get directly from our parents, the phenome as well, but the phenome is building up in ourselves from day one when we live based on environmental conditions, stress, good or bad air, nutrition, etc. And by figuring out the correlation in between those 2 strings, you will come rather soon to a point, and Calico is the first company to do that, to provide customized nutrition and customized medicine to people. That is a precise match to your genome setup. So going forward, my mother contracted cancer like 10 years ago, breast cancer. It was detected very early, but still she got the big hammer with chemotherapy that almost killed her because the side effects are so massive. But going forward, chemotherapy will be precisely tuned to your genome setup and to your phenome setup, so exactly the issue is being killed and not all the collateral damage is being caused around it. So also there, within the next 5 years or so, given, again, genome compilers, we'll be able to probably address many of the major diseases, especially cancer, in a time frame that roughly 10 years or so nobody would have ever thought of. And these are the big opportunities we have as well. And I think that this will also happen in a very democratic way, because this research, based on what I have heard so far from Calico, will be made available in a way that not only the few people who can afford it will be able to use it, but broader mankind will benefit from it. So stay tuned on what they do. Calico, to me, is one of the most amazing companies that are out there. And here in Germany, I don't know, 1 out of 1,000 know what they're doing, or even less. Yeah. And that's so interesting to see, because there's so much going on, but barely anybody senses what's going on. Yeah. Thank you.